Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Lion's Den. This is the Weekly Roar. Today, I'm going to talk about a very special skill that great leaders need to develop. It's the ability to create positive change. I'm going to talk about what I mean by positive change, why people resist change to begin with, and I'm going to share a framework with you that'll help you to create it. But before we jump into all that, I'm Greg Storch. I'm the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I focus on developing new managers into great leaders. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Last week, I continued my new leadership series called Leadership Reboot 2020. Start with you. It's designed to bring us back to basics by doing a leadership reboot and hopefully helping all of us to take a look at ourselves as leaders first. It all starts with you. I talked about character and how it helps us to form a strong foundation to our leadership. We talked about how we define characters and ways we can further develop ours in order to become the best leader we can be. If you missed that episode of the Weekly Roar, all you have to do is go to my website at lion-enterprise.com. Click on the Lion's Pride library where you'll find links to all of my videos. Last week's video is number 87. The Lion's Pride library is a free resource to check out, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. Okay, let's jump into today's Weekly Roar. I'm talking about change today. Change is probably one of the most challenging things a leader can face, regardless of where they're leading, whether you're in an organization or you're the leader of your family. Maybe you're a leader in your own community or even in a congregation. Having the ability to create positive change for those you're leading is the biggest test we face as leaders. Why do you think that's the case? Well, nobody that I know likes change, right? Change forces us to move away from our comfort zone, the familiar, and it makes us move into an area that's unknown to us. Moving in a direction that's unfamiliar can create a lot of fear for people, and that's a big reason why people just don't want to deal with it. Change is hard, and we rather take the easy way out, right? And this is why implementing change is a real test of our leadership. Not only do we need to take people where they may not necessarily even want to go because they're afraid of the unknown, but it's our job as leaders to challenge our followers so that they keep growing. Remember a few weeks ago on the Weekly Roar, I said, great leaders challenge their people. They don't focus on pleasing them. The reason why this lesson is so important to me is because I lived it. It wasn't that long ago that I was put into a challenging leadership position that required me to implement positive change. I have to tell you, it was one of the biggest tests that I've ever faced as a leader. When I was first promoted to program manager over a large IT support contract at one of the federal agencies in Washington, D.C., I was promoted and challenged with rescuing a sinking ship. The company was awarded a 10-year contract, and in its first year on the contract, they failed to get solid footing with the customer. In that short time, the company placed 6 program managers on that contract before promoting me into the position. A year and a half later, I was lucky number 7. Imagine the customer's frustration of having a new contract leader in place every 2 months on average. Needless to say, it wasn't going well at all, and the federal customer was feeling like they had made a big mistake awarding such a large contract to the company. In addition to that, we were experiencing problems with accurate and timely invoicing every month. Our monthly reporting deadlines were being missed, and process improvement was nowhere to be seen. And the unfulfilled promises to improve our service continued without resolution. If it sounds terrible, it's because it was. It was everything the nightmares of all leaders are made of. I'll never forget my first day as program manager. Now, I had already been on this contract as their operations manager, so I knew this customer very well. It's probably one of the reasons why they promoted me to program manager. But now I was responsible for trying to fix this train before it derailed. No pun intended, as the agency was the Department of Transportation. My main point of contact on the federal customer side of the contract was what's called the contracting officer's representative. We call those cores in the federal contracting world, and the core was a federal employee delegated the responsibility to ensure the contractor was delivering the services that were outlined in the contract. The first thing I did was to establish a weekly touch point meeting with my core. I'm never going to forget her. Her name was Judy Bloom. Yeah, that's right. I'm not kidding. Judy Bloom. And she had a reputation for being extremely demanding, by the book, and definitely not a big fan of our company. So I walked into Judy's office for our very first meeting, and I sat down in front of her desk, and I looked her in the eye and I said, Judy, I just want you to know that I understand the issues we're facing here, and I'm going to be the one to fix them. She looked at me and just stared for a second like she was rolling her eyes, and she said with the straightest face of doom and gloom that I've ever seen, she said, "That's what they've all said." Oh God, meaning every program manager before me, all 6 of them, told her that same thing, and none of them delivered. I became the longest standing program manager on that contract, and I was able to turn the ship around for the company. I was able to change the way our customer viewed our company by implementing positive change. And the program became the largest success story for our company, earning us the company's annual team award in my first year. Any leader can come in to fill the shoes of a successful predecessor, and they can continue moving in the right direction. That's easy. But it takes a really good leader to come in and take a team sailing in the wrong direction and have them right the ship and set sail in the right direction. So, change. Have any of you heard or read the book Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson? It's a book about dealing with change, and it was my first introduction really to managing change in my own life. The lessons from the book taught me that, well, one, change is inevitable, and how I could learn to adapt and anticipate change, heck, even embrace change. But It wasn't until several years later, after I devoured the 15 invaluable laws of growth, that I learned the power of change, the need for change in order to keep growing. I know a lot of you have read the 15 laws, but after today's weekly roar, I'll go ahead and put the links to these two books for Amazon in case you're interested in looking at them. Look in the Lion's Den, and in the comments, I'll go ahead and place the links for those. So, the big question is why so many people believe that they can get the benefits of positive change without the pain making the necessary changes needed in themselves. Well, one of the reasons why is because we tend to feel a little awkward with change, and we get self-conscious about doing something we don't normally do. Yeah, change is awkward. We all know that. How? Well, think about this. I think we've probably all done this at one point or another in our lives, but regardless if you're a right-handed person or a left-handed person, there's probably been a time when you've tried to write with your non-dominant hand. And what happens? Well, I know for me, when I try to do it, I struggle. It feels weird. And I end up switching right back to my dominant hand because my non-dominant hand is too awkward. That's a pretty common example, but think about a time that you were asked to switch to doing something different than you normally do and how you felt when you tried to do it for the first time. Once you think about it, then think about this. Most people are more comfortable with old problems than new solutions. Why? Because new solutions make us face the unknown, and that's scary. And whenever we face something that invokes fear, we do what? It's the fight or flight response. Many times, change makes us react with our flight response, and we retreat to what's comfortable to us. So that's one big reason why we want the pleasure of change without going through the pain of it. Socrates was quoted as saying, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." So another reason we don't deal with change well is because we tend to naturally focus on what we have to give up, what we're going to lose as a result of making that change. Now, I'm going to admit, I have this tendency myself. I never realized it until I started reflecting on some of the major changes that I've had to go through. And sure enough, my first thoughts were always about what I was going to have to give up. I'm going to share a couple examples with you. One of the biggest changes that I ever faced was my divorce 20 years ago. My kids were only 4 years old and 6 years old at that time. And I remember the day my ex-wife told me she was taking the kids and leaving. My very first thought was the change in my life of not seeing my children every day. I focused on what I was going to have to give up, what I was losing. And a more recent example was when we decided to move here to Italy. You know, we moved here for my wife's new job, and I wanted to support her the way she's always supported me in my career. But honestly, I had just established Lion Enterprise a year prior to that, and my initial thoughts again were on all the things I was going to miss out on, what I was going to lose by making that move. Now, luckily, in both of those examples, I was able to learn that it's really unrealistic to expect not to give up anything as a result of the changes I was facing. But I think where we get ourselves into trouble managing change is holding on so tight to what we currently have that we become willing to lose out on gaining anything, even when it's beneficial or positive. As leaders, we can create positive change by helping people get over that attitude of holding on to something so tightly that they miss out on the benefits of change. Now, this next reason carries even more weight today than I feel like it did just a decade ago. That's just my opinion. It's not scientific fact, but that's why we're overly concerned with the opinions of other people. We don't want them to make fun of us for doing something different, so we don't do it. Well, that's another reason why people have a hard time changing, doing something different. They're afraid they'll be ridiculed. I say it's worse now only because of what I've seen on social media and how people feel free to share their opinions, good or bad, with what we're doing, regardless of how it might make us feel. You know, one thing's for sure, social media has done a good job at a bad thing, and that's making us even more conscious about the opinions of others and making us play the comparison game. But whenever we change things up, we run the risk of being ridiculed for it. And when we fear being ridiculed, well, that can be enough for us to just not do anything. You know, on that contract I was leading, I remember specifically having to implement a major change in our quality control program. The quality manager at the time, she was really good, but she resisted the change at first because she was concerned with being ridiculed by our federal customer if it wasn't good enough. I had to understand that to be able to navigate the change that I needed to implement. When we're trying to introduce change as leaders, we have to have an awareness around people's different tolerance levels to ridicule. Some people just care a lot more about what people think of them than others do. And we need to understand that as we introduce change. It's going to be a factor for us because some people will fear the change because of it when they don't need to. So, those are a few things leaders should be aware of about their followers when they're trying to create positive change. Understanding some of the reasons why we tend to resist changes will help us as we begin the process itself to implement big changes. To be successful as the leaders leading change, we have to first be willing to lead those involved in the change through the process and do our best to take everyone along. Now, I'm going to have to admit, sometimes not everyone is going to be with you through the change. In order for us to be successful, you're going to need to assess who has the ability to manage the change and who does not. You know, sometimes we don't have all the right people in the right seats to make the change. And it's our jobs as leaders to not only ensure we have the right people to implement the change, but they're the right people in the right seats on the right bus going in the right direction. You know, in my early months on the contract as the program manager, I had to make that assessment. And there were a few people who I knew were not only going to not help implement the change needed, but were working to the exact opposite outcome. They were doing things that were jeopardizing my ability to implement the change. And we just couldn't afford that. They were definitely in the wrong seat on the wrong bus, headed in the wrong direction. So I made a stop. I opened the doors and took them off the bus. I replaced them with those who could help me get where we needed to go. So what I want to do today, now that I've talked about some of the reasons that people are reluctant to embrace change, is I want to share a relatively simple process that you as a leader can follow to help you implement positive change whenever you face the need to do it. This is going to help you to plan what needs to change, how to tell your people about it effectively, guide them through it physically, emotionally, and mentally, and then place your plan into action. So the first step in the process is to determine what changes are actually needed. Let's face it, we're creatures of habit, but the more we do something over and over, the more likely we are to miss the inherent problems that are keeping us from getting better. As a coach, I'm able to help my clients see things that they normally don't see for themselves. Am I magic? Well, they think so, but like I tell them, sometimes you're just too close to the issue to see it, and it takes someone outside looking in to be able to see the obvious. And for that reason, it's good to consistently review exactly what you and your team are doing and to identify things that need to be changed. My advice is to reflect back at the end of each year. Look at these things on an annual basis and make sure you're looking to see if you're doing everything right or what could be changed to make it better. If you find yourself years later doing the exact same thing, you probably should stop looking at it and start changing it. We can't assume that just because something works today, it will continue working tomorrow. So once you identify what needs to be changed, then the next step is you need to plan the work. Think through the process and lay it out step by step. What needs to be done? Who do you need to talk to? What are some of the potential challenges you might face? Do you have buy-in from your people for this change? Once you go through that, discuss the plan with others and get their feedback. Listen to what they're saying and empower your key leaders on your team to get involved in this process so you can create buy-in with them. Buy-in is essentially answering the what's in it for me question. They'll become your allies in helping get others on board with the needed change and can help you start developing the proper blueprint. Okay, so once you map out a plan for the work, you need to make sure you focus on the right priorities. Sometimes leaders make the easy changes, but easy changes don't always help us implement the needed changes. Good leaders know which changes are the critical ones that need their attention. Admittedly, critical changes are much more difficult to make and lead. But how do we know if they're critical or not? Well, if the change you need to make is going to have a cost associated with it, whether it's time or your energy or your resources, then that's a critical change that's going to have a huge impact once it's made. Remember this, critical changes come at a cost. If there is not a cost with it, then it may not contribute to the overall success of implementing the change. You also should understand the cost of not making the critical change. What's going to happen if you don't do anything different at all? Understanding this may help you understand which changes are most critical to make so you can avoid wasting time and energy on cosmetic changes that are just changes for the sake of change and don't contribute to the overall goal. So get your priorities straight, man, and make sure you identify the critical changes that must be made. Once you do that, then you need to make sure that the people are informed. What I'm really talking about here is strategic communications, StratCom. You never want to make blanket announcements about a major change you're leading before you've had the chance to communicate your intentions with key people. The last thing you want to do is blindside your allies. It's easy to identify who your key people are. Key players are those people who, if they get behind it, can make the ship sail. And the other key players are those who actually sail it. Let those people know about the change before making the big announcement at your next all hands meeting. Okay, so this next step can be really challenging for leaders, no lie. But if we slow down and provide clear and simple information to our followers, we can master this step, which is to allow time for our followers to accept the change. Why is it so hard for leaders to do that? It's because we're already armed with the information that others don't have. As leaders, remember, we see more and we see further than our followers do. So we're in a place that's way ahead of where our followers are at when they learn about the change we're trying to make. Don't forget that. This is a time for us as leaders to stop and turn around and bring our people along with us, not keep running full speed ahead and leave them in the dust. Good leaders always allow time for acceptance. This is where the chaos of change comes into play when it's time to implement that change. Chaos is that space between implementing the change and others beginning to see what you already saw. Once you get the buy-in, now it's time to work the plan. One thing I want to remind you of here is that you can't wait until you have 100% buy-in. You already know this. You never will. And if you wait around for it, you're never going to implement the positive change that you need to make. There's going to be some people who just don't get on board with the change, and that's okay. Focus on your influence and the people who will implement the change, and that will be enough to get you started. Focus on your influence and the people you need to implement the change. Once the ship is starting to sail, don't expect smooth seas for the entire journey. You have to anticipate rough seas ahead. Believe me, there will be heavy seas as you move forward. Anytime there's movement, there's friction. You know that saying, plan for the worst, but expect the best? That's a great saying for this step. That's exactly what we need to do as leaders. Plan for the worst. We need to be proactive at the beginning. So think of the worst first. You won't catch all the potential problems that can come up, but you can identify a lot of them and get prepared for them early before they happen. Leaders who have a proactive mindset and expect problems have everything they need to give change the best chance of being successful. Okay, another step in the process for implementing positive changes to focus on your wins. Be positive and highlight successes as you move along in the change process. One of the key things we can do as leaders to inspire change is to constantly reinforce the positive things about the change. Reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. One of the things I liked to do often was to celebrate wins, regardless of whether they were large or small, especially when I was able to recognize entire teams. It really helped me as a leader to encourage those involved in the change to keep going and to keep doing the right things. When we reinforce positive aspects of the change we're trying to make with people, it validates their efforts. So remember two things here in this step. Point to the good thing about the change and point to the people who make it happen. All right, the last step in the process is to look at your progress on a daily basis. Now, I know doing daily seems excessive, but it will do two things for us as leaders. It's going to ensure our ship is maintaining course and speed through the change, and it's also going to serve as a reminder to communicate your change message to your followers. Now, that last one's really important because without it, we tend to lose focus on the process until the change has already been implemented. And that's bad. We have to be careful there because without that frequent reminder and acknowledgement with our people, they might have the tendency to start to revert back to the old ways of doing things. Well, here's a little tip for you called the 3 C's to keeping your message of change going. Talk clearly, creatively, and continually about the change. Clearly, creatively, and continually. Okay, everyone. Today, I was talking about one of the biggest challenges that we face as leaders, and that's implementing positive change. I spoke a little bit about why people are so reluctant to embrace change and also shared a process that will help us as leaders to implement positive change. But I want to leave you with this final thought about implementing change as a leader. At the end of the day, our ability to create effective and successful change really depends on whether or not our people buy into us as leaders. How do we do that? Well, if you've been in the lion's den every week, then you know that we do it with integrity. I spoke about integrity just last week. Remember, people buy into the leader, then the vision. If you want to create positive change as a leader, if you want to know if they'll buy into your vision, all you have to do is ask yourself whether or not your people buy into you as their leader. If the answer is yes, then you have a process to follow now that's going to give you your best chances of successfully implementing positive change, the true test of a leader. Okay, everyone, that does it for today. Thanks again for joining me here today. I'm going to be back here next week speaking about more ways to reboot your leadership in 2020. That's right. Next week, I'm going to speak about one of the fastest ways we can gain leadership. Do you know what that is? It's problem solving. Next week, I'm going to speak about how to become a better problem solver. Why do we need to talk about that? Because problems introduce us to ourselves, it introduces us to others, and it introduces us to opportunities. Getting better at solving problems helps us to become better leaders. And that's exactly what we're here to do. I hope you're going to join me. Until we meet again next Wednesday, remember everybody, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.